Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're unpacking a really fascinating historical and theological breakdown. We are diving into Pastor Chris Meyer's deep dive of John chapter 20. You know, whether you're a total expert in biblical history, or maybe you're just curious about how these ancient texts are structured as evidence, this analysis gives us a seriously compelling framework. We're going to see exactly how this source material lays out what it calls an unstoppable resurrection.
The whole thing kicks off right at the end of the crucifixion with three incredibly famous words. It is finished. Now think about it. In any normal story, when the main character utters those words and gives up his life, we fully expect the credits to roll, right? The penalty's been paid, the story hit its tragic climax, it just feels like the whole shebang is over. But instead of the screen fading to black, the narrative keeps going. And that brings us to a really pivotal question posed directly by the pastor. What is there to actually say after it is finished? Well, he argues that while the cross deals with the penalty of the events, it's the resurrection that follows that completely breaks the power. It's not just some nice epilogue, it's the ultimate validation of literally everything that just went down.
So here is the core framework we'll be exploring today. 1. After the credits roll. 2. Evidence for the skeptical. 3. The value of testimony. 4. Hope for the exhausted. 5. A purpose to life. And 6. An eternal perspective.
Section 1. After the credits roll. The speaker tracks these totally frantic chronological movements, and he specifically highlights that all this goes down on the first day of the week. Now, John the Apostle is doing something super intentional here. By explicitly saying on the first day of the week, instead of just the third day, John's actually mirroring the language of Genesis. He's telling us, hey, a new creation is unfolding right now. We see Mary showing up in the pitch dark, the absolute shock of finding that stone rolled away, her frantic sprint to tell Peter and John, and then of course that famous foot race where John totally outruns Peter to the empty tomb. It's chaotic, it's raw, and it sets the stage perfectly.
Section 2. Evidence for the skeptical. Okay, so John wrote this account around 90 to 95 AD, which was a time when folks were incredibly skeptical. So he builds his case exactly like a legal eyewitness. And here is a fascinating piece of historical evidence. Mary Magdalene was the very first witness at the tomb. Now, why does that matter so much? Well, in the judicial courts back then, a woman's testimony literally wasn't validated or legally accepted. If you were going to fabricate a story to convince a bunch of skeptical first-century people, you would absolutely never use a woman as your star witness. It just wouldn't make sense. So the fact that Mary Magdalene is front and center actually authenticates the text. It proves John is just reporting exactly what happened, completely ignoring the societal norms of the time.
Section 3. The value of testimony. To really drive home the raw power of accurate testimony, the pastor shares this amazing story. Imagine an 1800s Texas bank robber. This guy has been constantly crossing the border, swiping the town's riches, and just vanishing. But finally, the police set up a sting operation and catch him red-handed. But there's a pretty major problem. The cornered robber only speaks Spanish, and the furious detectives only speak English. So they drag in a translator and tell him, you tell this guy if he doesn't tell us exactly where the money is right now, he won't live to see tomorrow. The terrified robber instantly confesses in Spanish. He gives these super precise directions. Walk 7 paces from the house to the barn. The treasure is buried right there. But the translator? Well, he senses a golden opportunity to keep the cash for himself. So he turns back to the English-speaking detectives, deadpan, and delivers this hilarious lie. He is a brave man. He is willing to die. It's funny, but it brilliantly illustrates the sheer value of having a true, reliable testimony. Without a trustworthy witness, you've got absolutely nothing. John steps into this ancient narrative precisely to be that trustworthy translator of the actual events.
Section 4. Hope for the exhausted.
This rock-solid eyewitness testimony naturally gives way to profound hope when we start looking at the empty tomb. The text draws a really sharp contrast between two different resurrection accounts, Lazarus and Jesus. You see, when Lazarus was raised, he stumbled out still wrapped up in his burial clothes, and, well, eventually he'd have to face death again. But when Peter and John peer into Jesus' tomb, they see something mind-blowing. The linen cloths are just left behind, and the face cloth is neatly folded in a place by itself. Think about it logically for a second. If grave robbers stole a mangled body in the middle of the night, they wouldn't unwrap it, and they definitely wouldn't take the time to neatly fold the face cloth like they were doing laundry, right? Jesus leaving his folded clothes behind basically signifies he passed right through them, stepping straight into a permanently glorified body.
Jesus is then defined in this context as the first fruits. Back in the day, in ancient agricultural terms, the first fruits were a massive indicator that a huge harvest was coming right behind it. So what does this mean for us? It means Jesus' physical resurrection isn't just some one-off isolated miracle. It actually acts as the prototype for the eternal bodies promised to the exhausted believer. It is the ultimate guarantee that all the physical struggles, the pain, the breakdowns of our current bodies, that is not the end of the story.
Section 5. A purpose to life.
Taking all this incredible theological hope, we translate it into everyday life through the sermon's core framework. The sequence here is absolutely crucial. You literally cannot have purpose without hope, and you can't have genuine hope without solid evidence. So it flows like this. The historical evidence completely satisfies the skeptical mind, which then unlocks hope for the exhausted soul. And when you put those two together, they culminate in a brand new, unstoppable purpose for living.
But getting to that sense of purpose definitely takes time. I mean, even though Jesus had been telling them about this event for 3 solid years, John openly admits that the disciples didn't really get it yet. They saw the empty tomb, sure, but it just hadn't clicked. It's kind of like how you can sit through thousands of sermons or lectures, but you forget almost all of them unless you get a concrete physical illustration to really anchor your memory. For those disciples, the empty tomb and those neatly folded clothes, that was the physical illustration they desperately needed to finally understand the words they'd been hearing for years.
And finally, Section 6. An eternal perspective.
So how does this ancient historical event dictate our modern mindset today? Well, since this sermon was actually delivered on Mother's Day, the pastor uses a really fitting analogy. He points out that mothers just naturally operate with a long-term mindset, right? A mom isn't only thinking about what her kid is doing today, she's pouring into them with a vision of the adult they'll be 10, maybe 20 years down the line. He challenges the audience to adopt that exact same mindset, but to extend that vision infinitely further, right into eternity. We really have to stop being so totally conditioned to obsess only over the immediate stressful problems of tomorrow. He argues that the reality of the resurrection should orient our lives for a truly staggering timeline. He throws the number 100,000 on the table. Think about that for a second. The way we live, the stuff we prioritize, the hope we carry, it shouldn't just be about surviving our next 50 or so years on Earth. It should be totally dictated by the fact that we are actively preparing for 100,000 years from now, living in that resurrected reality.
And that leaves us with a final, super provocative question to reflect on. If this historical evidence holds up, and if the resurrection truly is an unstoppable guarantee of our future, how does living with a 100,000-year perspective fundamentally change your purpose today? It's an incredibly powerful thought to end on, completely shifting how we view our daily exhaustion, our doubts, and our ultimate trajectory. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep looking at the evidence.